He bought her at an auction, but what he gave her was freedom. David had always believed that small acts of kindness could make a real difference in the world. He had spent most of his life quietly helping people, giving what he could to those who needed it most, but never seeking recognition. He worked a regular job, lived a modest life, and yet inside him there was a fire that refused to let him ignore injustice. He knew cruelty existed in many forms, but nothing had prepared him for the day he found himself standing outside a place that sold human lives like objects at a market. The air was heavy with tension, and the faint smell of smoke mixed with dust and sweat made it almost suffocating. David could hear the murmur of voices, some shouting, some laughing, some bargaining in ways that made his stomach churn. He had arrived here on purpose, drawn by information that had reached him earlier that week, an illegal auction where people were being sold against their will. He had tried to imagine the worst, but nothing in his mind could truly prepare him for what he was about to witness. Inside the hall was dimly lit, with rows of people standing like lifeless mannequins, each one waiting for a decision that could change their life or end it. The room was full of people who had been stripped of their dignity, some standing proudly as best they could, others hunched over, trying to make themselves invisible. At first, David's eyes darted from one person to another, searching, hoping to find someone he could help. And then he saw her. Amma! She was a young woman barely old enough to have known freedom for herself. Her eyes were wide with fear, scanning the crowd desperately. She had been through experiences no one should ever endure, and it showed in the careful way she moved, as if every step might be punished. Her hands were folded in front of her, trembling slightly, and she pressed her back against the wall as if it could somehow protect her. David felt a pang of sorrow that almost took his breath away. He had seen people suffer before, but seeing it here so raw and exposed made his heart ache. He noticed the way the auctioneer spoke, loud and commanding, treating the people as if they were nothing more than objects. "Do I hear 50? 50! Do I hear 60? 60! Proud!" The words echoed in the hall, and with each sale, David felt a mix of anger and helplessness rising in him. But when his eyes returned to Amara, something shifted inside him. Burst. There was a spark in her gaze, faint and fragile, but it was there. She looked at him for a moment, and though she didn't know him, he felt a connection that defied explanation. He knew he could not leave her here. David clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. He had to act, but he also had to think. The people around him didn't seem to notice the gravity of the situation. To them, it was just business. But he knew that to Amara, every second was a fight for her life. When the auctioneer started calling out the bids, David felt a surge of determination. He would do whatever it took to help her. He raised his hand when the auctioneer called her out. The crowd seemed to quiet, curious at his interest. David bid the amount necessary to secure her release. It wasn't about money. It was about saving a life. With each bid, his heart pounded harder, but he didn't hesitate. When the final call was made and the auctioneer declared, "Sold to the gentleman in the back," David felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that she was no longer under the immediate threat, and dread because he knew this was only the first step in a long journey toward freedom. Amara looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. She didn't understand why someone would buy her. In her world, she had only ever known fear, control, and exploitation. Trust had been a luxury she could never afford, and now here was a man who had done the unimaginable. He had offered her a chance at life without asking anything in return. The auctioneer gestured for her to leave with David. As she stepped toward him, every movement was cautious, almost hesitant. David extended a hand, not to command, but to guide. She didn't take it at first, keeping her distance, her instincts warning her of danger. But slowly, After a few moments that felt like an eternity, she allowed him to lead her out of the hall. The street outside was a stark contrast to the chaos inside. The cold evening air hit them, and the sound of distant traffic reminded David that the world continued to move, oblivious to the suffering happening in hidden corners. He led her to a waiting car, quiet now, but still tense. Amara's hands were clasped tightly together, and her eyes darted around, alert to every shadow. David spoke softly. "You're safe now." "I promise." He knew that words alone could not erase fear. But it was a start. During the ride to a safe house he had prepared, David stayed quiet, giving Amara space to breathe. She stared out the window, her mind racing with memories of the past, wondering if this was another trap or if this was really her chance at freedom. The silence between them was heavy but necessary. Sometimes words could be dangerous. Trust had to be earned slowly. As they reached the safe house, a modest place tucked away on a quiet street, David opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The interior was simple but clean, with a small kitchen, a living area, and a bedroom that had been prepared for her.
"You can rest here," he said gently.
"No one will bother you. You're safe." Amara hesitated, then stepped inside, looking around cautiously. The first time in a long time, she felt a faint sense of security, though it was accompanied by the shadow of doubt. David gave her time to settle. He didn't rush her or force conversation. He knew that trust could not be demanded. It had to grow, slowly, like a fragile plant. He prepared a small meal, placing it on the table, and gave her space to eat when she was ready. She didn't speak, but she ate, and that small act felt like a victory to him. Every step she took toward normalcy was progress. Throughout the evening, David watched her carefully, noticing the smallest signs of fatigue, fear, and hope. He understood that rescuing someone from immediate danger was only the beginning. The real challenge would be helping her navigate life beyond the auction, helping her rediscover who she was before fear had consumed her. And though he didn't say it aloud, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do everything in his power to give her a chance at a life she could call her own. As night fell, Amara finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Psst, why are you helping me?" she asked. David looked at her, meeting her gaze, and replied, "Because no one should be treated like that, and because you deserve to be free." She didn't respond immediately, but she didn't walk away either. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the possibility of hope, even if it was just a small spark. That night, as she lay in the small bed that David had prepared, Amara stared at the ceiling, thinking about what had just happened. The auction, the fear, the uncertainty, it all seemed like a distant nightmare now that she was here, Narration. And yet she knew that this was only the beginning. She had been bought once, but this time the intention was different. This time, she had a chance to reclaim her life, to take steps toward freedom she had never imagined. David, meanwhile, stayed up late, sitting quietly in the living room, making plans for the days ahead. He knew the road to freedom would be long and difficult. He also knew that the first step had been taken, the step that mattered the most. She was no longer in the hands of those who sought to control her. And that knowledge, simple as it was, filled him with a quiet determination to see her through the journey ahead. By the time morning light filtered through the curtains, Amara had slept fitfully but peacefully. The first night in weeks where she had felt a glimmer of safety had arrived, and though she didn't fully understand what the future held, she knew one thing with clarity. For the first time in her life, she was not alone. And that, more than anything else, was a beginning. Amara woke up to the soft light of morning streaming through the curtains. For a moment, she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process where she was. The previous night still felt like a dream. Being taken away from the auction, being led to a place that was safe, where no one shouted or demanded her as if she were an object. Her mind raced with questions. But there was also a strange calmness that she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she didn't have to worry about what would happen next. David was already awake, moving quietly in the small kitchen. He had prepared breakfast, simple but nourishing, and placed it on the table for her. When he noticed her watching him, he offered a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said.
You slept well? Amara hesitated before answering. She wasn't used to being asked about her comfort or well-being.
Most people in her life had only cared about what they could take from her. I think so, she murmured.
Her voice was soft, tentative, like someone testing a new world they weren't sure they could trust. David nodded and didn't press further. He knew patience was crucial. Trust had been stripped from her life too many times, and it wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. Instead, he simply gestured toward the food. "Eat when you're ready." "Take your time." Amara moved slowly, sitting down at the small table. Every bite she took was cautious, almost mechanical, but it was also a small act of reclaiming normal life. David watched quietly, knowing that this simple breakfast was more than just nourishment. It was the beginning of her feeling safe enough to take care of herself again. After breakfast, David decided it was time to talk. Gently. "I want you to know something," he began. "You're not here because you owe me anything. You're here because no one should ever be forced into what you went through. I'm not here to control you. I'm here to help you find your freedom." Virus. Beyond slightly.
Amara's eyes widened slightly. No one had ever said anything like that to her.
Most people had only tried to control or punish her. She wanted to believe him, but it was hard. "Why would you care?" she whispered. "Why me?"
David took a deep breath.
"Because it's the right thing to do. And because I see you, Amara. Break."
I see who you are, even if others never have.
Breaths. She wanted to, but trust wasn't something that could be forced. Instead, she simply nodded, letting the words sink in. They were strange words in a strange world, but they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. For the first time in her life, she realized that someone truly wanted her to be free, not for anything in return, but because she deserved it. The first few days in the safe house were quiet. Amara spent most of her time in her small room, unpacking a few belongings she had been able to keep, and exploring the space cautiously. Every corner of the house was a reminder that she was no longer in danger, yet she couldn't fully shake the habits that fear had ingrained in her. She flinched at sudden noises, double-checked the locks, and kept her hands folded tightly in her lap when David entered the room. David understood. He didn't force her to interact or move faster than she was ready for. Instead, he created a routine that was predictable and comforting. Meals came at regular times, the house was quiet, and he gave her space to rest and recover. He also began leaving small notes and messages of encouragement for her, gentle reminders that she was safe, that she was capable, and that her life belonged to her now. Breaths. Slowly, Amara began to respond to the kindness around her. She started to speak more during meals, asking small questions about the world outside the house. Grace. David answered patiently, never rushing, never dismissing her curiosity. They talked about simple things at first. What the weather was like, how plants grew, even stories from David's childhood. Break. Each conversation was a brick in rebuilding her trust, brick by brick. But freedom wasn't easy. Amara found herself struggling with feelings she hadn't experienced in years. There was guilt for surviving when others hadn't. There was fear that this safety might be temporary. And there was doubt, questioning if she deserved to live a life beyond fear and pain. Some nights she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, reliving memories of the auction, of the people who had controlled her, and of the loneliness that had been her constant companion. David noticed these moments. He didn't push, but he stayed nearby, offering quiet support. Sometimes it was just sitting in the same room while she stared out the window. Other times it was a soft voice telling her she was not alone. Over time, Amara began to speak about her past, cautiously at first, then more openly. She described how she had been forced into situations she couldn't escape, how she had learned to hide her thoughts and feelings to survive. Each word she shared was painful, but it was also freeing, a way to release the weight she had carried for so long. One day, David suggested something small, a test of independence, inspection. "Would you like to walk to the park nearby?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes?" "I'll be right there!" Amara hesitated. The idea of stepping outside alone, even with someone she trusted, was terrifying. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but there was also curiosity, a desire to see the world beyond the walls of the safe house. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. The walk was slow and deliberate, Percy, but as they moved further, she began to notice things she hadn't seen in years. Birds chirping in the trees, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, children laughing in the distance. It was overwhelming and beautiful all at once. For the first time, she realized that the world was not entirely cruel, that there was life beyond pain and fear. Over the next few weeks, these small outings became routine. David encouraged her to make choices: what path to take, what to eat, even what color to paint her room. Every decision was a small step in reclaiming autonomy. And with each choice, Amara grew more confident. She began to speak her mind, express her preferences, and even laugh at things that seemed silly but brought genuine joy. Even so, there were setbacks. Some days Amara would retreat to her room, overwhelmed by memories or anxiety. She would refuse to eat or speak, clinging to the familiar habits of survival. On those days, David remained patient. He knew that healing was not linear, and that trust and freedom required patience, understanding, and consistency. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Amara finally opened up completely. She sat across from David at the small dining table, tears in her eyes, and spoke of the deepest fear she had carried for years. She spoke of feeling invisible, worthless, and trapped in a life she didn't choose. David listened without interruption, offering only gentle nods and occasional words of reassurance. When she finished, she looked up, expecting judgment or anger, but found only compassion. "You are stronger than you know," David said softly. "You've survived so much, and now you have the chance to live for yourself. That strength is yours, Amara. I can guide you, but the life you want, you get to claim it." Amara felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she realized that freedom wasn't just about being away from danger. It was about having the ability to make choices, to live life on her terms, and to believe that she deserved happiness. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she felt that she had a chance to take it. By the end of the second month in the safe house, Amara had begun to show remarkable progress. Bathe turned down the house, learning to cook simple meals and even starting a small journal to document her thoughts and dreams. Each act, no matter how small, was a victory against the fear and control that had dominated her life for so long. David watched with quiet pride. He knew that her journey was far from over, but he also knew that the first and hardest step, trusting again, had been taken. She was beginning to see herself not as a victim, but as a person capable of choice, courage, and hope. And though the world outside remained unpredictable, Amara had discovered something powerful. She could survive, she could heal, and she could take her first steps toward a life she had only dreamed of. With David's steady support and her growing inner strength, she was learning to navigate freedom for the first time. discovering that even after the darkest experiences, hope could take root and grow. Amara's first taste of freedom had been gentle, slow, and cautious. She had learned that there were moments in life when she could make choices for herself, moments when fear did not have to rule her. But as the days turned into weeks, she realized that freedom was not always simple. Outside the walls of the safe house, the world was unpredictable and sometimes terrifying. Simple tasks that most people took for granted now seemed daunting. Walking down a crowded street, choosing what to wear, or even answering a phone call could feel like a challenge she wasn't ready for. David noticed her struggles. He understood that freedom was a process, not an instant transformation. One morning, he suggested they visit the local market, a place bustling with people, noise, and color.
He hoped it would help her grow more comfortable with the outside world. Just for a little while, he said gently.
We'll stay close together, and you can decide what you want to do.
Amara hesitated, her heart pounding at the thought. Her past had taught her to be cautious, to avoid attention, and to hide whenever danger approached.
But she also remembered the spark of hope she had felt in the park, the small moments of independence she had gained. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. The market was overwhelming at first. People moved quickly, shouting to sell their goods or bargain for prices. The smells of spices, fresh bread, and fruit mingled in the air. Colors were bright and everywhere. Amara felt her pulse quicken, her hands gripping David's arm tightly. Bah! She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the crowd, but she also wanted to see it all, to touch it, to live in it. David guided her patiently. Take your time, he said. Look at whatever you like. You don't have to buy anything unless you want to. Amara's eyes lingered on the small trinkets, the colorful fabrics, and the fresh flowers. She reached out tentatively, feeling the texture of a scarf in her hand. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. For the first time in years, she was allowed to explore without fear. And yet the shadows of her past still hovered. Every loud voice, every sudden movement made her flinch. Each step forward was accompanied by the memory of control, of being forced, of being told she had no choice. Back at the safe house, she sometimes sat quietly, overwhelmed by the day's experiences. She struggled to understand her feelings. Joy and fear mixed together, confusing her. She realized that freedom came with responsibility. She could make her own decisions, but she also had to face the consequences. That thought was frightening, but David reminded her gently that she wasn't alone. She had the ability to make mistakes and learn from them. She had the power to decide for herself. Even with David's support, there were challenges she hadn't anticipated. Her past had left scars that were not visible to the eye but affected her every thought and action. She sometimes avoided making eye contact, afraid of being judged or threatened. She hesitated to speak up in conversations, afraid that her words might be used against her. But she doubted her own abilities, questioning whether she deserved a life of freedom and choice.
One evening, while they sat quietly in the living room, Amara opened up.
I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. I don't know if I can live in a world where I'm supposed to make my own choices. I've been told what to do my whole life. And now... it's too much. David listened without interrupting. He understood completely. It's okay to feel that way, he said softly. Breaths. Freedom isn't easy. You've lived under control for so long, it's natural to feel unsure. But each small step you take is proof that you are capable. You don't have to do everything at once. Start small. Celebrate every victory, even the tiny ones. Amara nodded, trying to absorb his words. She realized that learning to live freely was like learning to walk again. She would stumble. She would fall. But each time she got up, she became stronger, more confident, and more capable. Over the next few weeks, David encouraged her to take small but meaningful steps. She learned to cook meals for herself, gradually taking over tasks in the kitchen. She learned to handle money and make purchases at the local store. She even started small conversations with neighbors, discovering that the world was not entirely hostile. Each experience was a challenge, but also a triumph. She began to see herself as someone who could survive and thrive, not just as someone who had been rescued. But freedom also meant facing parts of her past that she had tried to forget. One day, a man appeared near the safe house, someone from her past who had been involved in her capture. Seeing him from a distance, Amara froze. Her body trembled, and fear flooded her mind. Spice tear-up returned in an instant. David noticed her reaction and immediately took her inside, closing all doors and windows. "Door!" Bursup, "You are safe," he said firmly. "He cannot hurt you here." "Now, one can." Amara clung to David, tears streaming down her face. It was a reminder that freedom was not only about physical safety, but also about mental and emotional healing. She realized that she would have to confront these fears, learn to trust her own judgment, and understand that the past could not control her future. Over time, she began to face her fears gradually. She took walks outside alone, venturing further each day. Grasp. She learned to identify safe places and people she could trust. She started small projects for herself, like painting or writing in her journal, and each act gave her a sense of accomplishment and independence. She discovered that freedom was not just the absence of danger, but the presence of choice, creativity, and self-expression. Amara also began forming connections with others. David introduced her to people who had survived similar experiences and were now living independently. Meeting these individuals inspired her, showing that recovery and freedom were possible. Breaths. She realized that she was not alone in her journey, and that sharing experiences could be a source of strength rather than shame. Despite these successes, setbacks were inevitable. Some days, memories of the auction and her past life would return, filling her with doubt and fear. She sometimes questioned whether she could truly be free, whether she deserved happiness, or whether she was capable of making the right choices. On those days, David reminded her gently that healing was not linear. Freedom was a path, not a destination. Every setback was an opportunity to learn, grow, and strengthen her resolve. One pivotal moment came when Amara decided to walk to the nearby market alone. It was a test she had set for herself, a challenge to prove that she could navigate the world independently. The market was busy, full of people and noise, and at first, fear gripped her tightly. But she remembered David's words, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. She moved slowly, observing her surroundings, making decisions carefully, and gradually gaining confidence with each step. When she returned to the safe house, her face was glowing with pride.
"I did it," she whispered.
"I really did it." David smiled warmly. "You see, each step you take is a victory."
You're stronger than you realize. That evening, as Amara wrote in her journal, she reflected on her journey.
Freedom was not easy, but it was worth every struggle. She realized that she had the power to shape her own life, to make choices, and to reclaim her identity. The scars of the past would remain, but they did not define her. She was learning to live on her terms, one step at a time. By the end of this phase of her journey, Amara had grown in ways she could not have imagined. She had faced fear, taken risks, and discovered the strength within herself. She had learned that freedom was not simply about escaping danger, but about learning to trust herself, make choices, and embrace life fully. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, she now had the courage to walk it, knowing that she was capable of creating a future defined, not by fear, but by hope and self-determination. Amara had come a long way since the day David rescued her from the auction. The fear that had once dominated every moment of her life had begun to loosen its grip. She was learning to trust herself, to make small choices, and to navigate the world without constant fear. Yet something inside her had begun to stir. A desire not just to survive, but to discover who she truly was, beyond the pain, beyond the fear, and beyond the shadows of her past. One morning, David suggested something new. Amara, he said gently, you've been learning to live in freedom. Now, maybe it's time to explore what makes you you. What do you enjoy? What excites you?
What do you dream of doing?
Amara hesitated. She had spent so many years surviving, so many years being told what to do or how to behave, that she barely remembered what it meant to have dreams.
But the question awakened something in her that she hadn't felt in a long time, a curiosity about herself. She thought carefully and finally said, Russian. I don't know yet. I want to find out. David smiled. That's a good start. Let's take it slow. Start with small things. Things that interest you. Painting, music, learning, whatever you feel drawn to. At first, Amara tried painting. She picked up a brush and stared at the blank canvas. For a moment, fear crept in. What if she was no good? What if she wasted her time? But then she dipped the brush in color and let her hand move. The first strokes were hesitant, uncertain, but soon shapes began to form. The colors were bright and bold, reflecting feelings she had never expressed aloud. With each stroke, she felt a small thrill of pride. She realized that creativity could be a form of freedom, a way to express herself without fear of judgment or control. Encouraged by this experience, Amara began exploring other activities. She started writing in her journal every day, recording her thoughts, memories, and dreams. Writing became a safe place to confront the past and imagine the future. She wrote about small victories, like walking alone to the market, as well as bigger milestones like standing up to her fears and asserting her independence.
Through writing, she began to see patterns in her own growth and understand the person she was becoming.
David also encouraged her to interact with the world in small, controlled ways. He introduced her to a few supportive neighbors and friends who had experienced challenges themselves and now lived independently. These connections helped Amara understand that she was not alone and that there were people she could trust. Sharing stories with others brought comfort, validation, and even inspiration. She realized that her experiences, while painful, had given her strength and perspective that could help others in similar situations. One day, David suggested volunteering at a local community center. At first, Amara was hesitant. She had never imagined helping others. Her life had been about surviving herself, but she agreed cautiously, thinking it might help her gain confidence. Her first day at the center was challenging. New faces, new rules, and responsibilities she had never experienced. She felt nervous and unsure. But as the day went on, helping even in small ways, organizing supplies, assisting children, or simply listening to someone, she felt a sense of purpose. She realized that she could contribute, that she could be part of something bigger than herself. Amara's confidence grew. She began to take more initiative, suggesting ideas and helping others without hesitation. She discovered that she had talents she had never explored: patience, empathy, creativity, and resilience. She started to believe that her past, while painful, had shaped her into someone capable of making a difference. She was no longer defined by fear or oppression. She was defined by her courage, her determination, and her growing sense of self. At the same time, Amara also worked on her personal independence. Bird. She learned to manage finances, plan her days, and make decisions without relying on David. He remained a mentor and support, but she understood that true freedom meant taking responsibility for her own life. She opened a small savings account, practiced budgeting, and even started planning for future goals like continuing her education or learning a new skill. Each step reinforced her sense of control and self-worth. Yet the journey was not without setbacks. Some days, memories of the auction and past abuse would resurface unexpectedly, filling her with fear or doubt. Irritation. Other days, small mistakes, like forgetting a task or miscommunicating with someone, would make her question her abilities. But David was always there to remind her that mistakes were part of learning, that setbacks didn't erase progress, and that freedom included the ability to grow from failure rather than fear it. A turning point came when Amara decided to organize a small art show at the community center to display her paintings and the work of other participants.
She was nervous. Public exposure had always been terrifying.
But with careful preparation and support from David and her new friends, the event went smoothly. People admired her work, asked questions, and expressed genuine appreciation. Amara felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that was entirely new. She realized that she could face challenges, share her voice, and even inspire others. This was more than freedom. It was empowerment. As Amara grew more confident, she began setting personal goals. She wanted to continue her education, improve her skills, and eventually pursue a career that gave her independence and stability. These goals, once unimaginable, now seemed within reach. She realized that the life she had dreamed of, her own choices, her own home, her own opportunities, was becoming possible. David watched her growth with pride, but also with quiet humility. He had only offered her a chance, a safe space, and guidance. The rest, the courage, the determination, and the progress had come from Amara herself. He recognized that true freedom meant letting go, trusting that she could navigate life on her own terms. And, though he remained a support, he understood that her journey was ultimately hers to lead. One afternoon, Amara stood outside the safe house, looking at the city around her. The world, once overwhelming and threatening, now seemed full of possibilities. She thought about the journey she had taken. From fear to trust, from survival to small independence, and now toward true self-discovery. She felt a sense of pride in how far she had come, but also excitement for the path ahead. She knew challenges would still arise, but she had the tools, the courage, and the support to face them. By the end of this chapter in her life, Amara had truly begun to find her identity. She was exploring her talents, asserting her independence, and building connections with others. She was learning that freedom was not only about safety, but also about self-expression, purpose, and personal growth. The girl who had once been terrified, silent, and powerless was becoming a young woman capable of making decisions, setting goals, and embracing life with hope and determination. Amara understood that her past would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had the power to write her own future, to choose the person she wanted to become, and to live a life full of meaning, courage, and possibility. And though the road ahead was long, she now walked it with confidence, independence, and the growing certainty that she could shape her own destiny. Amara had come far from the terrified young woman who had been rescued from the auction. Despite decisions, and to reclaim her sense of self, but now the final stage of her journey awaited, the stage where freedom was no longer just about safety or small choices, but about fully embracing life on her own terms. She knew it would not be easy, but she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and determination to walk this path. The first step was finding a place of her own. Living in the safe house had been comforting, but it was not truly independent. Amara wanted a space that was hers completely, where she could make decisions without hesitation, decorate as she pleased, and create a home that reflected who she was becoming. David helped her search for a small apartment nearby, guiding her through practical matters like rent, utilities, and budgeting. But he never imposed his will. The choice was entirely hers. And when she finally selected a modest apartment with a small balcony, she felt a mixture of pride and excitement. For the first time in her life, she had a space that belonged solely to her. Moving into her new apartment was both thrilling and daunting. Amara unpacked slowly, arranging her belongings carefully. Every item she placed on a shelf, every decoration she hung on a wall, felt like a declaration of independence. She had survived fear, oppression, and uncertainty, and now she was creating a life that reflected her choices and her dreams. For the first time, she truly felt ownership, not just of her home, but of herself. With a stable home, Amara turned her attention to her future. She had always loved learning, but opportunities had been denied to her. Now, she enrolled in courses at a local community center, learning skills that could help her build a career. Each lesson was both challenging and exciting, a reminder that growth required effort and perseverance. She studied diligently, knowing that education was a key to a life where she could be independent, confident, and self-sufficient. Alongside her studies, Amara continued to explore her passions. She painted regularly, sometimes for herself, sometimes to share with others at the community center. She volunteered occasionally, helping children and young people who faced difficulties, and in doing so, she discovered the joy of giving back. She realized that her experiences, while painful, had given her empathy, insight, and resilience that could inspire and support others. This sense of purpose strengthened her, showing her that freedom was not only about personal safety but about living meaningfully. Even as she embraced independence, Amara maintained a close connection with David. He remained a mentor and a friend, but their relationship had evolved. He no longer guided her with careful oversight. Instead, they spoke as equals, sharing ideas, experiences, and reflections. Amara realized that she no longer needed someone to protect her. The protection she had once relied upon was now within herself. David had helped her learn the tools, but she had built the strength. Amara also began forming deeper friendships outside the safe house. She reached out to people she met at the community center and at local gatherings. At first, social interactions felt intimidating. She had spent so many years avoiding attention and trusting no one. But gradually, she learned to engage with confidence. But she listened, shared her own experiences, and discovered that relationships could be built on trust, respect, and mutual support. Each connection she formed reinforced the truth that her life could be full of meaningful relationships, laughter, and shared experiences. One significant moment came when she was offered a small project at the community center, organizing a workshop for young people who had experienced hardship. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. Standing in front of a group, sharing guidance and encouragement, and leading activities was a challenge she had never imagined herself taking on. But Amara remembered the journey she had traveled, from fear to trust, from survival to independence, and from doubt to self-confidence. She accepted the challenge. The workshop was a success. Amara guided participants through exercises in self-expression, confidence building, and goal setting. She shared her story in a way that was empowering, showing the audience that hardship did not define their future. The impact was visible. Children and young adults smiled, asked questions, and expressed hope.
Amara realized that helping others had become a source of strength and joy for her.
She understood that freedom was not just about herself. It was about inspiring and empowering those around her. Alongside these achievements, Amara continued to explore her dreams for the future. But she had always wanted to complete her education and build a career, and now she began laying out concrete plans. She researched programs, applied for opportunities, and networked with people in fields that interested her. Each small step was both exciting and affirming. She was no longer waiting for permission to live. She was creating her own path, guided by her passions, values, and abilities. But throughout this time, Amara also reflected on her past. She understood that the auction, the fear, and the years of oppression were part of her story, but they no longer controlled her. But she forgave herself for mistakes made in survival, and she acknowledged her resilience and courage. These reflections strengthened her sense of self and her determination to live fully. She realized that freedom was not only physical safety, but emotional healing, self-respect, and the ability to choose her life without fear.
By the time she had settled fully into her independent life, Amara had transformed remarkably.
She walked through the city with confidence, engaged in conversations with ease, and embraced opportunities without hesitation. She decorated her apartment with personal touches that reflected her journey and her personality. She continued her studies, her art, and her volunteer work, building a life full of purpose, creativity, and fulfillment. One afternoon, as she sat on her small balcony watching the sun set over the city, Amara reflected on the journey she had taken. From the day she had been bought at the auction, terrified and powerless, to this moment of independence and confidence, her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for David, for the people who supported her, and for the inner strength she had discovered within herself. She understood that freedom was not a gift that could be given once and forgotten. It was something she had to claim every day. Through choices, courage, and self-respect, she realized that she was no longer defined by her past but by the person she was becoming. A person capable of love, creativity, independence, and hope. As the evening sky turned shades of pink and orange, Amara smiled, knowing that she had truly stepped into a life of freedom. She had faced fear, reclaimed her independence, discovered her talents, and embraced her identity. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had led her to a place where she could live fully, on her own terms. Amara's story was now one of triumph, not over someone else, but over the fear, doubt, and oppression that had once defined her existence. Desque and opportunities she had been given and built a life filled with possibility. She knew that challenges would continue to come, as they do for everyone, but she also knew that she had the strength and wisdom to face them. In the quiet of her apartment, Amara allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of completing her education, building a career, and perhaps even helping others who had faced similar hardships. She dreamed of a life where laughter, choice, and love were constants, not privileges. And she knew with deep certainty that she could achieve these dreams because she had already conquered the hardest battle, learning to trust herself and claim her freedom. David visited occasionally, and each visit reminded Amara of how far she had come. They shared stories, ideas, and quiet moments of reflection. But there was no longer a dependence. She was fully capable of navigating her life. She respected him, cherished his support, but she no longer needed someone to hold her hand through every decision. Her strength had become her own. One day, Amara took a long walk through the city, breathing in the fresh air and observing the world around her. Children played in the park, neighbors chatted across fences, and life moved forward with its ordinary rhythm. She realized that she could step fully into the world now, not as a frightened, powerless girl, but as a woman who had earned her freedom and was ready to embrace life completely. She felt a deep sense of peace and possibility, a feeling that had been foreign for so long. Amara knew her life would continue to evolve, that she would face challenges, make mistakes, and continue learning. But she also knew that she had the resilience, courage, and determination to shape her own future. She had been bought once, but what she truly possessed now was far more valuable: freedom, self-respect, independence, and the knowledge that she could create the life she wanted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara stood tall, looking forward. The darkness of her past had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. Her journey had brought her to a place of strength, confidence, and hope. And in that moment, she understood fully what it meant to be free, not just to live, but to live with purpose, courage, and joy. Amara's story was one of transformation, resilience, and empowerment. From fear to trust, from survival to independence, from oppression to self-discovery, she had walked a path that few could imagine. And now, standing in the light of her own life, she knew that freedom was not just a moment. It was her way of living every single day,